The one thing I want you to take away from this video is something that applies year-round and to everybody. If you're under 18 or are the type of person who can't handle having your views challenged, this may not be the right video for you. Either click away now or hit pause and go find a mature person to view it with you. Welcome everybody, my name is Jason Bodine and this is my channel. If you're new here, chances are you found this video because it's Pride Month and the algorithm recommended it. I don't like to cover political topics on my channel because they're controversial and divisive. So when I do cover a political topic, it's because my take on it is different from the takes of both sides of the American political spectrum. That was the case when I did my video on abortion rights after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it was the case when I made videos covering anti-male sexism in the United States of America. Today we'll be exploring the question, does the progressive left really care about the LGBTQ plus community? And it's the case with that subject too. Hence the viewer discretion warning you just saw and heard. Since a lot of you people watching this are new to the party, let me take a minute to tell you what you can expect from this video. Back in the day, I spent a lot of time at the JSU library writing research papers in pursuit of a graduate school English degree. Typically, when I do a video like this one, that's how I'll structure it. I'll state my thesis, back it up with supporting evidence from cited sources, give you my conclusions, and then you'll grade me on it with your thumbs up or thumbs down and comments. Just like my grade school days, every once in a while I'll hit on a subject so new and original that there's little, if anything, written about it, either for or against. I always get excited whenever that happens because it means I get to dive into the primary sources to investigate instead of trawling through secondary sources to see what others had to say. Today's video covers just such a topic, and the best sources for something like this are the people that it affects. So, once I'm done giving you the available data and telling you what I think it means, I'd like those brave souls who are willing to give me your thoughts and personal experiences in the comments section. It'll help grow that data set enough to either confirm or refute the ideas expressed here, and who knows, maybe it'll help somebody down the road who wants to do a full-blown study on the subject. Okay, let's do this. In case it's not already obvious, the premise of this video, my thesis statement as it were, is that no, the progressive left does not really care about the LGBTQ plus community. That's because I believe the available evidence shows they're really nothing more than the flip side of the extreme right wing with the exact same goal, turning non-straight people into straight people. For the purposes of this video, we're going to be dividing American political views into three groups: the progressive left, the extreme right, and the moderates. The progressive left are the AOCs and Bernie Sanderses of American politics, primarily Democrats who stand on identity politics as their primary platform. The extreme right wing are the people who just as soon send LGBTQ plus people to conversion therapy or to church to quote unquote pray the gay away, as look at them. The best example that comes to mind is David Duke. I haven't actually heard his stance on this particular issue, but the man is a former Grand Wizard of the KKK, so it's not that hard to guess where he lands on it. And the moderates are the people who fall in the middle. They can be Democrat, Republican, or Independent, and may have their own personal opinions on the issue, but aren't going to make a big deal out of it. An example of a moderate Republican might be Tulsi Gabbard. Sadly, the most recent moderate Democrat I can think of is Bill Clinton. And by that, I mean 1992 Bill Clinton. The 2025 version has had so much of his soul drained out by the ghoul he's married to and the creepy little hobgoblin they spawned together that he might as well be this dementia patient. Now, let's dive into it a little deeper, shall we? Let's start with a comparison and contrast of the extreme right and progressive left's respective ideologies about the LGBTQ plus community. It's no secret to anybody familiar with this channel's history that I strongly dislike, to put it mildly, the extreme right wing's attitudes towards orientation and their attempts to change it in those who don't conform. I've told the story of, let's call it self-unaliving, since YouTube censors don't like the real word, of a friend who couldn't deal with his own orientation and tried everything, including going to church, to change it. I'll link to that story in this video's end screen, and I'll put it in the description as well, along with the other videos that I've referenced here. As I'm about to show you, the extreme right wing, as reprehensible as their views and tactics are on this, aren't the only ones whose attitudes towards orientation lead them to try to change it in those who don't conform to their ideas. The progressive left also does it, and their version is every bit as odious. We'll start with the right-wing version, since that's what people are most familiar with. That'll make it easier to see the progressive left's version and the tactics they use to employ it. As for the moderates, well, they don't really play a part in this part of the discussion, at least, because they'll tell you what they think if you ask them individually, but by and large, as a group, they tend to take the view that the country has more pressing issues to worry about. To compare and contrast the extreme right and progressive left's versions of this ideology, first we need to define them in their proper context. Since the extreme right's version of it is already well known and documented because of its mostly negative impact on society, and the responses that came about to combat it, like the Matthew Shepard Act, which added orientation, gender identity, and disability to the list of 14th Amendment protected classes, the legalization of same-sex marriage, and the creation of Pride Month, and because I don't want to waste your valuable time and mine telling you what you already know, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the right wing's view and then move on to a more expanded look at the left wing's version. Defining the progressive left's version in particular will also make it easier to see how it came about and why it's a problem for the LGBTQ plus community as we go further into this deep dive later in the video. The extreme right wing's ideology on this issue, in a nutshell, is that non-straight people need to become straight because being anything other than heterosexual is either a sin to be forgiven and washed away if it is a choice, or a form of mental illness to be treated if it isn't. This complex worldview is based on two Old Testament verses, Leviticus chapter 18 verse 22 and chapter 20 verse 13. It takes into account neither the historical context in which these two verses were written, nor what the original untranslated text actually says, and it is fueled by cognitive dissonance, which won't allow them to either educate themselves on those things or to reconcile their beliefs with the facts known by medical science. This is a view shared by the more religious people on the right. Most of them will just say, "I'll pray for you," if they say anything at all. But in the extreme right wing's case, the group we're concerned with here, it rises to the level of outright pathology. They'll use every tool at their disposal, such as those you see on your screen right now, to convince the LGBTQ plus person to choose heterosexuality in order to conform to the former Leviticus verse, and will use the latter verse to justify rejection and, in the most extreme cases, violence if those methods don't work. Agree with it or not, the extreme right-wing stance is clear, simple, and straightforward because they wear it out in the open for all the world to see. Change who you are on the inside to match what you are on the outside, or you can't join our exclusive club. The progressive left stance is the flip side of this. Change what you are on the outside to match who you are on the inside, or you can't join our exclusive club. But to see it, we have to probe a little deeper than the surface scan we just did for the extreme right. That's because it's been wrapped in an aura of activism and advocacy with the ribbons of science and academia tied into a neat little bow around it. An aura that may once have been genuine 30, 40, or 50 years ago, but has today become a smoke and mirrors illusion fueled by a left wing that has moved further left than it ever did in the past, towards a communist ideology, and adopted the methods of the same to spread its message. Now, I already covered this in a broader, more general way in the video you're seeing a link to right now. Make sure you have time set aside to watch that one, though, if you want to watch it, because it's 42.5 minutes long. So in this video, we're going to focus exclusively on how it applies to the LGBTQ plus community. If you've already seen that video, you know where I'm going with this, so I won't rehash with a whole lot of detail. The tactics the progressive left used to draw the LGBTQ plus community into their identity politics-based brand of communism is identical to those they used to manipulate the other groups they seek to appeal to. Redefine terms to make a group of people feel like victims of oppression and indoctrinate them with that ideology from a young age in order to foment a revolution against another group that's been blamed as the oppressors. I'll touch more on that in the next part of this video, but for the purposes of this part, when you put everything we've just talked about together, the similarities and differences between the extreme right and progressive left ideologies becomes glaringly obvious. Both are alike in that they preach diversity yet demand conformity, and different in who they approach, how they approach, and the core ideas they approach them with. Is that oversimplifying things? Yes, absolutely, it is. The similarities and differences go far deeper and are far more complex than I have time for in this video. If you'd like to see something more detailed, hit that subscribe button and help me build up enough of a fan base to justify starting a Patreon. Now, let's talk about some specifics and as we get into how the progressive left's ideology applies to the LGBTQ plus community and why it's problematic. I'm going to take a brief pause at this point to give the more cancel culture prone and easily offended among you who chose to ignore the warning at the beginning of this video one more chance to bow out gracefully. I am about to spend the rest of this video spitting some uncomfortable but completely verifiable truths about the progressive left and their relationship to the LGBTQ plus community. After all, I just tore into the extreme right wing, and it would hardly be diverse, equitable, and inclusive of me to not pluck both wings of the bird, now would it? Now, the rest of you, feel free to pause this video here, consider this an intermission, go refresh your coffee, go to the bathroom, get you a snack, whatever you need to do, and then we'll continue at the count of 3. Ready? The left wing and the LGBTQ plus community have a long history together, and there's no question the former has done a lot of good for the latter in terms of advancing LGBTQ plus rights in a country that largely views orientation and identity as moral choices rather than unchangeable scientific realities. The 3 I mentioned earlier, the Matthew Shepard Act, the legalization of same-sex marriage, and the creation of Pride Month, did a lot to help make the United States a place where the LGBTQ plus people felt safer, had the same rights as other groups, and felt like they could celebrate who they were born to be. That said, and as with everything else, you can't bring in positive changes without some negative changes come along for the ride. The country began seeing most of the positive changes during Barack Obama's first term in office. But as the years progressed and the left remained in power while evolving closer and closer to a communist ideology, we began to see a chain reaction of negative ones appear as the force of change itself continued unchecked by any kind of moderation or reason. Those changes didn't begin with the LGBTQ plus community, but rather trickled down into it along with all the other groups in the progressive left voter base as they, again, as I discussed in the video I just referenced a few minutes ago, flooded every part of American culture and society with their abomination of an ideology born from the hybridization of communism with modern-day Jim Crow racism. The spread of that ideology is covered in that other video, and the negative changes it brought for the LGBTQ plus community are too numerous to list here without making this video a lot longer than it needs to be. If you'd like to see me cover this in more detail in another video, let me know in the comments. But what's important here is how it evolved over time and led to the situation they face today. A society where they not only have the extreme right wing more galvanized against them than ever before, but their own once united front is fractured from within its own ranks. It is, in fact, the most important fact stated in this video, and the very thing it is centered around, because those two things feed off of each other. And if the progressive left really cared about the LGBTQ plus community, they'd shift their stance to stem the tide of negative feedback rather than doubling down on it. Let's see if I can break it down for you without turning this one segment into a 15-minute grad school class presentation, because that ship is pretty much sailed as far as total video length goes. And I think it's important to understand how and why their alliance with the left wing became destructive and worse, self-destructive for the LGBTQ plus community. First, I need to clarify right quick that Pride Month actually became official in 1999 under Bill Clinton, but it didn't really get entrenched into the national consciousness until the Obama administration and later the Biden administration highlighted the LGBTQ plus community and kept them in the news cycle, which is why I grouped it together with the Matthew Shepard Act and the legalization of same-sex marriage, which did occur during that period. That's also when the ideology-driven policies of the progressive left created a negative feedback loop between themselves, the right wing, and, most importantly for the purposes of this video, the LGBTQ plus community that, as of 2025, has left the latter two houses divided against themselves. I don't think it's necessary to cover how the left was affected by its own progressive policies. We've all seen the recent infighting in the Democratic Party, after all. But it is important to understand how this feedback loop came about, because it's part of a larger systemic pattern of destruction that's tearing its way through society. And no matter how much spackle we spread into the cracks, they're going to keep coming back and getting bigger until we fix the foundation. Tensions have always existed between the various subsets of people in American society, but though it was far from perfect, prior to Obama's first term, those tensions stayed relatively low and society remained stable. This included the extreme right wing and the LGBTQ plus community, whose tensions were based on their differing viewpoints about orientation and gender identity. The seeds of what was to come between the extreme right and the LGBTQ plus community in 2025 were planted during that first Obama administration, and what those seeds were will, regardless of your orientation or gender identity, come as no surprise to you if you're a moderate. But you are likely blind to them if you exist in either extreme of the United States political spectrum. The first is fairly obvious: the attention the administration brought to the LGBTQ plus issues. Naturally, this brought certain aspects of that subculture under more public scrutiny, and this led to the unfortunate side effect of increasing tensions not only between the extreme right and the LGBTQ plus community, but between certain subsets of that community itself. Primarily, The extreme mannerisms and modes of dress displayed by the people at the parades looked like Sodom and Gomorrah to the extreme right, and served as a source of embarrassment that caused many in the community to dislike Pride Month events. This second was less obvious but far more destructive than the first because it did far more damage to the standing of the LGBTQ plus community in American society than the first could ever hope to, even though it seems completely separate and unrelated. The twin issues of racism and sexism brought on by the demonization of white men as the source of all America's ills. But even during Obama's administrations, those things remained mild. So, what changed? No, it wasn't this guy right here, though I understand why some of you watching this would be tempted to think so. Donald Trump's appointment of right-wing justices to the Supreme Court during his first term did contribute to some of what would follow, and he's issued executive orders during his current term that some, but not all people, see as anti-LGBTQ+. But the Supreme Court was fulfilling its function as an independent branch of government, as evidenced by the timing of those decisions and the fact that not all of the decisions put before the court by the Trump administration during his current term have gone his way despite the court's right-wing majority. And Trump's executive orders this time around are in direct response to the Biden administration's extremist progressive policies, which are the real force behind the feedback loop between the extreme right wing and the LGBTQ plus community by the aforementioned chain reaction of negative changes those ideology-driven policies brought about. Now, just a quick side note, as I was listing them on paper, I realized there were more events in the chain than I thought, so I may not be able to keep it to the length I thought in this segment, but I'll give it the old college try to keep it as short as possible for you. But anyway, that chain reaction of events went something like this. Obama's two administrations effectively gave LGBTQ plus people the same rights as straight people, while at the same time setting the groundwork for more sweeping changes down the line by framing white men as America's boogeymen. Donald Trump's surprise victory in 2016 delayed the advancement of the Democrat Party's progressive left agenda, prompting them to aggressively mobilize their voter base, increasingly towards the point of radicalization, to ensure that he wouldn't win a second term in 2020. It worked, and when Biden and his sidekick Bolshevik Barbie took office in 2021, they resumed the agenda started by Obama, but at a vastly accelerated pace. DEI policies were implemented at every level of the federal government that soon spread to state and local governments and even to private industry, ensuring mass hirings of people based on race, gender orientation, and gender identity rather than qualifications, not just in government institutions but in every part of American society. Meanwhile, their voter base became increasingly emboldened and radicalized as riots like the BLM protests broke out as the progressive left framed them as mostly peaceful, allowed them to go unpunished, and manipulated social media to censor dissenting viewpoints. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 to return the abortion issue to the states, the progressive left capitalized on it by framing it as a violation of women's rights in order to bring the female demographic into their ranks. Things took a turn south when transgender women joined that fight with claims that they're real women too, who can get pregnant and are entitled to the same reproductive rights. This was the final ingredient in a recipe for disaster that sparked the negative feedback loop that we've been talking about, that led to the re-election of Donald Trump in 2024 and the situation with the extreme right wing and LGBTQ plus community that they find themselves in today. I'm going to be frank with you. The only thing surprising about the end result of all of this for the progressive left, the extreme right wing, and the LGBTQ plus community is that anybody is surprised by those end results. When a group whose primary objective is total systemic change mixes such a corrosive and explosive blend of elements together and filters out anything that can balance or dilute it, it's the only thing that can happen. That mixture is going to get into places it shouldn't ought to go. And when it finally goes off, chances are it's going to backfire and take you with it too. That's exactly what happened here. The radicalization of the progressive left voter base combined with the Biden administration's system-wide DEI policies had the inevitable effect of spreading their ideology to the most vulnerable members of society by putting radical activists in positions of authority they had no business being in. I'm not just talking about judges and lawmakers here either, but also school administrators, teachers, and sporting institutions. And when the trans subset of the LGBTQ plus community, particularly trans women, began claiming that they're no different from their biological counterparts, and trans issues began being spread into schools and sports arenas by the aforementioned activists, the fuse was lit, and it was only a matter of time before, well, boom! By 2023, most women felt under attack as they had to share their private spaces with untransitioned men claiming to be women and were being injured by transgender opponents in sporting events. Teachers were trying to convince kids that they're transgender. School administrators advocated for gender-affirming care for kids while trying to keep their parents out of the loop. And on the streets, fully naked men were riding around on bicycles during Pride Month parades in full view of on-looking children. Now, what happened next, both in society and in society at large and internally within the LGBTQ plus community, is something that blindsided the progressive left, but the moderates saw coming from a mile away. Society-wide, the progressive left began losing support as large chunks of their own base abandoned them until their loss in 2024 left them running around like the proverbial headless chicken until this very day, and the right wing became stronger and more popular than they've been in a long, long time. Within the LGBTQ plus community itself, a growing rift fueled by confusion and resentment appeared between the trans population and the other segments of the community, as gay, lesbian, and bisexual people were suddenly labeled transphobic if they said they preferred to partner with biological men or women. People who'd identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual for years were suddenly questioning their sexuality and or gender identity, and the focus of the community shifted to transgender rights to gender-affirming care. And it was those latter two things together that ultimately manifested as the feedback loop we've been discussing between the LGBTQ plus community and the extreme right wing, because it effectively turned the movement that united the community together for so long into the very antithesis of itself. I was born this way and I'm not ashamed became my body, my choice, which emboldened the extreme right's notion that orientation and gender identity are choices. And so the loop goes around. Pride Month is almost over as you're watching this, but that's okay, because the whole point of this discussion, the one thing I want you to take away from this video, is something that applies year-round and to everybody, not just the LGBTQ plus community. Pride, real pride, is about celebrating who you are and never letting anybody, be they on the left, right, or in the middle, tell you to change. But it also means respecting other people's right to do the same thing, even the people that you don't like. and disagree with. After all, live and let live is the only way to live. And that's all I've got for you in this video. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful and informative, please be sure to give me a like and a subscribe and share this video with your friends. And I'll see you for the next one. Until next time, guys. Peace.